Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rapping with the Rep, or in this case, Rapping with the Reps. It's my pleasure to welcome to our show today my friend and colleague, second majority leader, Sarah Peake, who is a representative from Provincetown. And what we're going to talk about today is redistricting. Representative Peake was on the redistricting committee and is gracious enough to appear via Zoom. By the way, this opportunity to connect through virtual means like this Zoom is just great because we can get together, we can have discussions in ways that used to be much more difficult. But here we are. And so every 10 years, as we'll talk about, we in the legislature have a task, which is to create new districts for the US Congress, as well as the state Senate and the House of Representatives on the state side. And Representative Peake was on that committee, as I said, and we want to talk about what we did, how we approached it, how we accomplished that task and the result of it. So welcome to Burlington and Bedford.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. It is really great to be on your program. It's great to see you, even if it's virtually. For the people who watch your cable program, I'm starting out calling you Mr. Chairman, and you refer to my title, but I'm Sarah and you're Ken.
That's
and
right.
We do a lot of great work together. And while we have been meeting very effectively remotely, right. You have been holding hearings, the legislature has been meeting, we've been taking roll call votes. It's just a little harder, and we kind of all like being together in order to kind of get some stuff done. But it's nice to be with you quasi in person on your cable show today.
It's nice to, like you said, nice to be with you virtually in person as well. And so redistricting, well, really it does affect everybody in Massachusetts. But I want to talk to you about our process because it's a little different than what people read about in the news in other states. In fact, I have a good friend who retired and he moved to North Carolina, and the North Carolina Supreme Court heard oral arguments yesterday on challenges to redistricting from a racial perspective and from a political perspective. And what we did in Massachusetts was we really took people's condition, whether it be race or otherwise, into mind so that everyone would have an equal voice as much as possible in the operation of our state government. So let's first of all talk about how people got their voice to the table in the process of creating these new districts here in Massachusetts.
Yeah, Ken, I'll tell you, I was pleased and honored to be appointed by the Speaker to this joint committee on redistricting. I've been in the legislature, well, this is my 16th year, my 8th term, and I have never had an experience like this in my legislative life before. And when I say that, I say it in only the most positive way. The collaboration among committee members, the collaboration between the House and the Senate, and the collaboration with advocacy groups and outside experts to make our process as transparent and as citizen involved as possible. We heard testimony from over 600 individuals. That was during the course of 20 hearings, and I missed one hearing one day, but I was at 19 of those 20 hearings. They were all held virtually like this. Some went on for hours, but we did not end a hearing until the last person who wanted to speak had the opportunity to speak and to offer their testimony. And I want to give a shout out to Chairman Mike Moran on the House side and Chairman Will Brownsberger on the Senate side, who led the charge, but also to my fellow committee members. So among those 20 hearings, we started out sort of at the basic level with 9 of them. As you know, we have 9 congressional districts here in Massachusetts. So we held a virtual hearing in each of the 9 congressional districts, and that was advertised and word went out. We began each hearing with an introduction to, and then hearing testimony from the existing sitting member of Congress who is from that district, other elected officials, local boards, everybody from school committee members, boards of selectmen, city councilors, water commissioners. I mean, there were a whole host of electeds, but maybe most importantly, there were hundreds and hundreds of citizens who came and testified. And I was sitting right in this very room, but I felt like I was taking a trip across the Commonwealth from Provincetown up to Gloucester, down to New Bedford, to Worcester, to Sturbridge, out all the way to the Berkshires and every community in between. And none of those 9 hearings, there were no 2 that were the same. People had different concerns and thoughts. A lot of people testified about the size and shape of their congressional district. You know, keeping the Berkshires together was important for the Berkshires, for example. Other areas were more concerned with what their state Senate district was going to look like and whether that was going to divide up minority communities or what their state rep districts were going to look like. Down here on the Cape, the largest feedback we heard is currently the town of Barnstable, which contains the city of Hyannis in it, is represented by 3 representatives. And we heard loud and clear from people down there. They didn't like being divided into thirds. They'd be okay being divided between 2, but they didn't like being divided among 3. And we were successful in being able to shift people around so that Barnstable is now will be, after the next election, represented by 2 reps.
Yeah, you actually bring up a good point at one of the last things you said. These will take effect after the next election. Currently, the districts are what they were since 2010 or 2011. You are the representative from Provincetown. Currently, what towns do you represent, and will that change?
Yeah, it will. So when I was first elected, I represented 7 communities on the Outer and Lower Cape. And for people who are familiar with Cape Cod, that's basically Harwich, Chatham, Orleans, and then going up the line, Eastham, Wellesley, Truro, and Provincetown. 10 years ago, after the census, there was a loss of population in Barnstable County on Cape Cod and the islands as well. And so as a result, you know, I live in Provincetown, but represent down through the elbow. There's no place for me to go out to sea. I mean, I could get a precinct in the Seaport District because we're connected by ferry, at least seasonally, but you know, how crazy would that be? So as I had to push west, I picked up 10 years ago now, 1 precinct, the easternmost precinct in Brewster. So I had 7 1/3 communities. I shared Brewster with Representative Tim Whalen and have enjoyed that very much. Tim actually lives in Brewster, but it caused a domino effect. Everybody pushed west so that the district that's called the 5th Barnstable District, now represented by Representative Stephen Exaros, it actually had to push over the canal and pick up 2 precincts in Plymouth County. So here you have a rep that lives in Barnstable County, lives on the Cape. You know, we're sort of this geographically identifiable area, and there's a whole Cape Cod culture about things. But here he was skipping over the bridge to pick up 2 precincts in Plymouth. So this census came out, and much to our surprise and delight, and I like to think to our big social media push, because you know there was an extension of time for citizens to answer the census due to COVID, and they could answer it online. There was a major push, and we actually saw population grow. It grew significantly in Nantucket, the same in Martha's Vineyard, and my district, the Outer Cape towns, all grew significantly enough so that I will be able, under the new maps, to kind of pull out of Brewster again, which allows everybody, those dominoes, to shift back east. And Rep. Exaros's district after Election Day will not include those Plymouth precincts. And we get everybody from Cape Cod back over the bridge and on Cape Cod, just where we like them and where the advocates like them.
And it's interesting because that domino effect, I think, is the challenge that you faced in doing the redistricting, because every municipality affects the other municipality as things move from the borders of Massachusetts, yours being in the Cape, but also the Berkshires and other places, whether they're coming eastward or north or what have you. Our district here, we call the 21st Middlesex, which has been for the last, I think, several decades, it's been the towns of Bedford, Burlington completely, and then one precinct in Wilmington. And what we did in redistricting was we united Wilmington under Rep. Dave Robertson, so he'll now have that whole town. The effect that had on my district was that our towns now have to have an average of 43,000 people, give or take, I think 5%, right? So we've got to be in that window. No matter what we do, we've got to stay in a window.
Right.
And so that left this district population-wise a little bit short. And so we picked up one precinct now in Lexington because everything moved around.
I was, ultimately the chairman are in charge of this, but Chairman Moran asked me if I, having attended all the hearings and all of that, if I would work with the Cape delegation on sort of crafting what these lines look like with an idea of making, having Barnstable go from 3 to 2 and bringing the 5th Barnstable district back over the canal and all onto the Cape. And in working with them, an analogy for your viewers, I felt like I was ironing like a fitted sheet, let's say, or a shirt, where you're chasing that wrinkle all around. Maybe if it's a shirt, kind of up the sleeve and onto the shoulder, and then that's how it works. And in talking with Chairman Moran at the end of the process, this is how it affects things. He said, our ability to kind of back out of Plymouth County and entirely within Barnstable affected their ability to create another majority-minority district in the Brockton area. So, Brockton and Provincetown, it's probably a good 3 hours apart driving from each other, but yet what happened in my district affects people as far away as Brockton.
Right, and similarly, Western Massachusetts lost population from one census to the update. That meant that those districts had to grow in geography in order to have the same number of people in the district. And so everything seemed to push eastward.
That's right.
Geographically. And that would create a shift. The other thing that we were able to do in redistricting was create 8 new majority-minority districts so that people in different groups, Latino groups and African Americans, would have a greater voice. Can you talk a little bit how that was done? And also, I think we have a map showing these new districts. We can show that.
Yeah, exactly. So, we look at the census data, and of course, what so many of these lawsuits are about in places like North Carolina and Texas is the legislature seeking to divide communities of color, protected classes, under the Constitution, protected classes. So in other words, African American and Hispanic, so Black and Hispanic people, you don't want to, and you're not allowed to constitutionally splinter them in order to weaken their voice. So in other words, if you were to take a community that is predominantly Black and have 4 representatives represent that town, and the rest of those representatives' districts are 80 or 90% white, you'd end up with 4 white people representing that Black town or that Black dominant city. And those people would lose their voice and an opportunity of representation at the state level. So we looked at all of that and drew the lines to create these new majority-minority districts. And in addition to that, there are 33 what they call majority-minority opportunity districts. And that's an increase of 13 of those districts. And what an opportunity district is where I think it's over 50% of the population is either Black or Hispanic or a mix of both. So you're not looking just at a Hispanic population or just at a Black population, but an overall sort of minority population. So we increased, we have 33 of those on these new maps, and that's an increase of 3. Of those 8 are majority Hispanic and 2 are majority Black. So Ken, assuming that the voters will have us back for another term, I think redistricting is going to significantly change the face of the state legislature, and I think change it for the better, where people who live here and work here and have their families here, they are appropriately represented in their state governing body.
And that's why I expect that in Massachusetts, unlike places like North Carolina that I was talking about at the beginning of the show, we're not going to see these court challenges to these districts because we had these hearings, we listened to people coming and testifying about their priorities, and we tried our best to protect everybody's interest here in Massachusetts. And we did that by creating these districts. The one closest to my district here in Burlington and Bedford is one in Framingham. And so because that was created, again, that ripple effect, or as you said, ironing a shirt, which is a great image of what that does. It pushes things around. And so that had an effect on Lincoln, a town next to ours. But because of that, their representation would change. Because of that, Concord's representation would change. Even though that's not Framingham, it's just you've got to keep 43,000 as an average in every district.
That's right. That 43,000 plus or minus 5%. And actually, that plus or minus 5%, I saw it at work in the 6 districts that we have here on the Cape and Islands, because I am down very close to the bottom line for the minus 5%, and Representative Kip Diggs is very close to the cap of the plus 5%. But we were able to use that sort of 10% wiggle room in order to achieve good redistricting principles. And on this subject of no lawsuit, I think it's important to note that not only in this cycle, but 10 years ago as well, there were no lawsuits brought against the state legislature for how redistricting was done. And I think that speaks volumes. And it's important to talk about because I heard at hearings people loosely throwing around a term gerrymandering. And this district looks like this because you gerrymandered it.
Right.
Well, nothing could be farther from the truth. And the proof of the pudding is not only did we, you can't say we prevailed in lawsuits, but the process was so good and so spot on and so based on data and constitutional mandates and good principles of representation that no lawsuits were even brought, and no lawsuits have been brought during this cycle either. And there's only a handful of states nationally, and I should have had that statistic for you, but I don't. There's only a handful of states nationally that have not been sued over redistricting, and proudly, Massachusetts is one of those.
Certainly some people looking at the map will say these districts can be odd-shaped, and that's true. And the reason that they're odd-shaped is, starting with what we've been talking about, is they all have to have an average number of citizens in the district. So you're starting with, you've got to hit that number. Second thing is that all of the municipalities have to be contiguous. So you can't jump over one to get to another to create your average of 43,000, give or take 5%. So because you've got to put those two pieces to the puzzle together, certainly you're going to look and say, okay, we'll take that municipality, and because we prefer not to divide or split municipalities, but it's got to happen in order to hit that 43,000, give or take 5% number. But to avoid that, that's why you see the districts in various shapes and I'm going to say in sizes, but they're the same size. Well, geographically, they're not the same size.
Geographically, they're very different.
The population may be spread out. That's true too. But that's why the mere fact that they're not all squares and circles, that's not really helpful analysis, because you can't have that in these. And so as I look, not being on the committee,
and if we just went and this is an idea that many people espouse, if we just went and created rectangles, let's say, that got us to the 43,000 people, we would not have the majority-minority representation that we have achieved through this. We would not be able to consider other factors, for example, where school districts might go. 10 years ago, I pushed hard to get a precinct in Brewster. I could have pushed into Dennis also, but Brewster is in the Nauset Regional School System. Dennis is in the Dennis-Yarmouth Regional School System. So what had a greater affinity to my district? Brewster did. They share the same community development corporation. They have many of the same issues. So these are all things that we take a look at and try to comply with and consider when those maps are drawn. And then, of course, you and I are from towns, so we think about towns and precincts and how many towns you have. our colleagues who represent like the city of Cambridge or the city of Boston or even Worcester, I know in Cambridge and Boston, we even got down to census blocks in order to hit that sweet spot of just the right number of people and what the makeup of the people are and all of that kind of stuff.
And so a census block, to our viewers, is a group of people that's really down to a neighborhood, really. It's a very small amount of people used, and that's used by the census itself, right? And that's
In a place like the Seaport District, it might be one apartment building would be a census block.
yeah,
For
that's
example.
right. That's right. And that came into play when we did the congressional map, which we also do. Briefly, the Senate map also changed in various ways, but I want to tell our viewers that the Senate maps for the towns that our viewers, our local viewers, are living in, Bedford, Burlington, are the same. So the folks in Bedford are still represented by Senator Barrett, Mike Barrett, and the folks in Burlington are still represented by Senator Cindy Friedman. The Congress, again, that had to change because our westernmost congressional district, the first district, had to grow geographically because they lost population. And so that had to push all of these districts eastward toward you. And in order to comply with the size, the only change at all that happened using census blocks was that the 5th congressional district, represented by Congressperson Catherine Clark, grew into Bedford. So there are a small number of houses, about 50. Mine actually happens to be one of them.
Yours included, right?
Mine included, that were affected because that line came through. It used to stop on the Lexington-Bedford town line, and it moved into Bedford by a few streets. Our law is that a district has to be, the line has to be either a natural boundary, like a town line or a river, or it has to go down the middle of a street. I learned that looking at this map. And so it goes, in Bedford, it goes on the middle of, for example, Page Road onto Shawsheen Road. But that's the only change that we'll see. And I'm excited for representing Bedford and being a resident of Bedford, that we'll now have access to two great voices in Congress.
That's right.
What were the other challenges that you saw in those other maps?
Well, one of our lengthiest and maybe most heated hearing was the one for the map of CD9, my congressional district, represented by Bill Keating. And there was a push by some to unite Fall River and New Bedford and put them in Representative Auchincloss's congressional district, and take away part of New Bedford. I guess it would be from Bill Keating, right? Because he has New Bedford, not Fall River. But we heard as much testimony, especially, so it was interesting. There were people like the mayor of New Bedford who testified that they wanted to be with Fall River. But we heard from the mayor of Fall River who said, we like having our own congressman, or even splitting the city between Auchincloss and Keating, because we get twice the bang for the buck, and we feel we would be swallowed up by the needs of New Bedford and not have the same focus and attention from our member of Congress that we have now. So we ended up keeping New Bedford and Fall River split from each other. Congressman Keating moved sort of up the coastline, almost to the way the district was prior to the census 10 years ago. He goes up as far as Scituate now. When I first started paying attention to such things, our Congressman Bill Delahunt lived in Quincy, represented Quincy, and his district came down all the way out to Provincetown and the islands. And Barney Frank had New Bedford. And then after the last census change, part of New Bedford went to Congressman Keating, and the district moved out of Quincy. Keating actually had to move and buy a house in Bourne on the Cape because where he was living was no longer in the congressional district that he was elected to serve. So, there's so many moving parts. One of the things we didn't talk about is because we have so many brilliant colleagues who have been snatched away by the Biden administration and a couple of others who have retired, there are a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 what we call incumbent-free districts, where either the rep is retiring or they've left to do something else. And then as the district was reconfigured through redistricting, so those are districts that offer an opportunity for people who might not otherwise be able to jump in and get themselves elected to run for those seats. And I'm just looking here. So many of those, so Fourth Essex District up in Essex County is a majority Hispanic. The 6th Middlesex is a majority minority opportunity district. And remember, that's where at least 50% of the population is either Black or Hispanic. The 11th Plymouth is majority minority opportunity district. The 11th Suffolk is majority Hispanic. And the last one is the 19th Worcester, and that doesn't fall into any of those categories. But 4 of these 5 incumbent-free districts are either majority minority opportunity or a majority minority district. And that's going to bring about change as well.
Yeah, and I think those districts that you're describing, one is Framingham, one is, one is in Boston, right? One is Brockton.
6 Middlesex. 4th Essex is the old Brad Hill district.
Yeah, that's Ipswich.
Ipswich area, right.
Right, and Ipswich changed, I think, because Lawrence changed to give a greater opportunity for minority folks to have a voice, and so that bumped its way down.
Exactly right. So there were a lot of moving parts, and thank goodness we had as many hearings as we had on this sort of struggle about the New Bedford Fall River issue. It was interesting. We heard from a lot of people that New Bedford and Fall River have a majority Portuguese population,
right.
Either people from mainland Portugal, from the Azores, or from Cape Verde. And they said, we deserve to be represented by somebody who looks like us. We want to keep these communities together. But constitutionally, the Portuguese heritage is not something we are allowed to consider. If we do, guess what? That is gerrymandering. It would be like saying, oh, there's a lot of Irish people that live in this area. We want to keep all the Irish together to ensure that an Irishman is going to get elected. We can consider Black and Hispanic, but Portuguese, Cape Verdean, and Azorean people are not statutorily on the list of what we are allowed to keep together. No more than my Scottish and German heritage would be something that you'd be allowed to consider.
So there really are a lot of rules, a lot of guideposts that we have to stay within.
That's right.
Last comment or last observation is, this was also done in a way as a bipartisan effort. There were Republicans on the committee, but also I noticed in the negotiation to do this, and when the bill was released and we voted on it, there were very few amendments. One that was introduced by the Republican leader was allowed, was adopted, and we put it in. So we still didn't hear much of a complaint from our colleagues from the other side of the aisle either, because their voice was heard as well.
Right. And Governor Baker signed it into law, and if my recollection serves me, he did not return it to us with any amendments. He signed the bill as we sent it to him. And, here we are. People, when they pull their ballots, some people in Brewster will pull their ballot and they'll say, where's Sarah Peake? I thought she was my rep. And instead they'll see 2 other names of people who are running for that district. And that's as a result of the redistricting process.
Right. And that's why it's so important for people, when they had that census to answer, that people respond to the census and answer it, because everyone should be counted. Well,
That's right.
Leader and Representative Sarah Peake, thank you very much for being our guest here on Rapping with the Rep. It was our honor to have you. And to everyone, thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time here on Rapping with the Rep. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.